My name is Curtis Sterling. I'm 73 years old, and I'm retired from the lumber and building supply business right here in Clifton Creek, Alabama. Folks say life teaches us lessons in unexpected ways. But the lesson I learned cost me my 35-year marriage and changed forever how I trust people. What I'm going to share today might just serve as a warning to anyone watching, because trust is like concrete. It takes a while to set, but once it cracks, it never really goes back to the way it was. If this story touches your heart just a little, go ahead and leave a like to cheer up this old man. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next life stories. And tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is where you are. It truly warms my heart to know which little corner of the world and at what time of day folks are listening to me. Me and Lena, we were what you'd call a traditional couple in this part of the state. We met when I was just a young man working at my daddy's store, selling supplies to folks looking to raise their own homes. Back then, Clifton Creek wasn't even a proper town. It was just a small settlement where everybody knew your business. The people here have that welcoming southern air, you know? We talk with that slow, rolling drawl that stretches vowels and takes its time. We got married in the main church, had a big reception in the parish hall, with barbecue and sweet tea flowing, just like Southern tradition dictates. We built a life together, brick by brick, as I used to say. From our union came 2 children, Marcus and Denise, who are grown now, each with a family of their own. The business prospered. I became a respected merchant in town, supplying materials for everything from small renovations to the big construction jobs when the county started to grow. Lena was always a dedicated wife. At least that's what I thought. During the hurricane seasons, she'd organize drives to help affected families. Everybody knew Miss Lena, Curtis from the lumberyard's wife. Our life was simple, but happy, with that quiet, small-town routine. On weekends, we'd fix up pitchers of ice-cold sweet tea, which is tradition around here, especially on the hot days, and we have plenty of those. We'd welcome friends over for Sunday dinner, some good meatloaf and macaroni and cheese. We participated in all the community events, like the Clifton Creek County Fair and the church's annual bazaar. It was a good life, quiet, the kind of life folks in the big city dream of having. Everything started to change when we were a little older, after I retired and left the store in the care of my oldest boy, Marcus. Our routine had shifted. Now we spent more time together at home. That's when Lena started a story that, at the time, didn't raise any red flags for me. But today it makes me feel like the biggest fool this side of the Appalachians. And it all began when Lena came up with a story that, honestly, I found quite sweet at first. She said her grandma Maeve was getting on in years and needed looking after. I'm going to spend Fridays at Grandma's house, she told me one evening while she was preparing that peach cobbler that only she could make right. She's all alone, poor thing, and needs company. I'll be back Sunday. Who was I to stop a granddaughter from taking care of her grandmother? I even thought the gesture was nice. Lena always had that charitable streak. She helped with drought relief campaigns when the weather got extra sun-scorched, as we call it, and participated in the church's social work. Seeing her worry about her grandma only confirmed what I already knew about her character. At least, that's what I thought. Shoot, the first time, I even offered to drive her, but she quickly explained that Grandma's house was small. The old lady was very private, and she didn't like visitors, especially men she didn't know well. "You better stay put, my old man," she'd say, with that classic Southern way of stretching her words. "Grandma's a little temperamental with strangers. She gets flustered." And so the routine began, every 2 weeks, and then it became every week. Lena would pack a small suitcase, take the Greyhound bus from the Clifton Creek terminal, and go visit this supposed grandmother who lived in another city. She said she was in Atlanta, about 200 miles from here, which explained why she only returned late Sunday night, always looking tired but satisfied. Sometimes she'd bring back a little souvenir, maybe a bit of pecan pie Grandma had baked, or a small embroidered item, things like that. I kept them fondly, thinking how nice that family bond was. When she came back, I'd ask, "How's Grandma doing?" And Lena always answered with details. That her blood pressure was stable, that she had taught her to take her medicine at the correct time, that they'd watched soap operas together. This went on for almost 3 years. It became a normal part of our life. I got used to my solitary Fridays. I'd use the time to go fishing with the fellas down at the Oakley River Reservoir, play cards at Tommy's Roadhouse, or just stay home watching a gospel show on television, sipping a glass of sweet tea. Every man with his own routine, right? A marriage of so many years sometimes needs those little breaks. It was a Tuesday when everything began to crumble like a bluff during the spring rains. My daddy had passed away some years back, and as is tradition in this region, I went to the Clifton Creek Memorial Park to bring flowers and light a candle. It was Memorial Day. All the families go together. It's almost a procession, leaving the main church and walking up the hill where the cemetery, the City of the Dead, is, as we call it here. I got to the cemetery early that day. I like to go before the crowds to have a more private moment with my departed. I carried a bouquet of marigolds, the same kind that bloom naturally after the rains in our region, and a white candle I bought at Mrs. Johnson's corner store near the square. The Clifton Creek Memorial Park isn't big. It's one of those small town ones where you practically know the stories of everyone buried there. After a quiet moment beside my father's grave, I started walking between the headstones, reading the names and remembering the people I knew in life. In a small town like ours, you pretty much know everyone, don't you? It was while walking like that, lost in memories, that I saw a simple gravestone, a little off to the side, with wilted flowers someone had left maybe weeks ago. I can't even tell you why that grave caught my eye. Maybe it was the broken ceramic angel in the corner, or the letters already half faded by time. When I got closer and read the name, a shiver went up my spine. Maeve Sterling, beloved mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Below the name, the date of passing. 2014. Maeve Sterling. I thought to myself, grandmother. It couldn't be a coincidence. It's a common name, sure. But something told me that this was the supposed grandmother Lena was visiting every Friday. I stood there, looking at that date, 2014. The woman had departed this world 10 years ago. How could Lena be visiting someone who had been gone for so long? I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, that it had to be another Maeve, another grandmother. But the doubt had already taken hold, and like a fire ant, it started burning from the inside out. I went back home that day with my head swimming with thoughts. I couldn't even concentrate on the gospel show I liked so much. During dinner, I looked at Lena with new eyes. She was fixing cheese-stuffed bell peppers with rice, a classic dish around here, and chatting about banalities, as if everything was perfectly normal. "The St. Benedict procession is coming up this Sunday," she commented while stirring the pot. "Sister Siobhan asked for help decorating the float." I nodded, but my mind was far away, fixed on that headstone in the cemetery. I wanted to ask her directly, but something told me to wait, to investigate more before confronting her. We have a saying in the South: The one who waits by the riverbank sees the body of their enemy float by. Not that Lena was my enemy, but I needed to know the truth without startling the prey. "So how's your grandma doing?" I asked casually as she served me dinner. "Oh, she's fine," she replied without hesitation. "Her pressure was acting up a little, but it's under control now. You know how old folks are? One day they're fine, the next a new ache pops up." The naturalness with which she lied chilled me to the bone. So many years together. And I had never realized how easily a lie could slip out of the mouth I kissed every night before bed, when she even invented details. I had to take her to the clinic last Friday. The doctor prescribed a new medication. That night, I couldn't sleep well. I kept thinking about how many other lies she must have told me over our 35 years of marriage. Doubt is a worm that gnaws worse than termites in green wood. The next morning, I made a decision I never imagined I'd make. I was going to hire a private investigator. In our small town, we don't have private detectives like in the movies. I had to drive all the way to Atlanta, the state capital, to find someone who could help me. I told Lena I was going to settle some old business from my merchant days, old store documents that needed to be formalized. She didn't suspect a thing. She even made some sausage biscuits for me to take as a snack for the drive. I found a man named Samuel, a thin fellow with a sharp gaze and a neatly trimmed mustache, who had a small office near the bus terminal. He welcomed me with weak coffee in a styrofoam cup and listened to my story without showing any surprise. Apparently, stories like mine were daily bread for him. "Mr. Sterling, this is more common than you think," he said after I finished my tale. "I'm going to need some details. The days she travels, the bus she takes, the departure time, and a retainer for expenses, of course." We agreed on the fee, and I gave him all the information I had. He promised to call me as soon as he had news and guaranteed absolute discretion. I drove back to Clifton Creek with a weight on my chest, like I was carrying a sack of wet cement. I never thought the day would come when I, Curtis Sterling, would need to spy on my own wife. The following weeks were torture. Every smile from Lena, every gesture of affection seemed fake. Now I caught myself analyzing her expressions, looking for signs of a lie that had previously gone unnoticed. When she said she was going to travel the following Friday, I simply nodded and wished her a good trip, just like always. On Saturday afternoon, Samuel called me. The payphone down by the square rang, and Mr. Henderson, the owner of the store, came to call me, saying I had a call. I ran over there, my heart pounding faster than a drum at a church revival. "Mr. Sterling, this is Samuel. I have the information you requested," he said in a neutral voice. "Your wife took the bus to Atlanta, just as you said. I have followed her and found out she doesn't go to any grandmother's house. She checks into a hotel called the Heron Inn, but she doesn't use her own name to register. She goes by Laura Jenkins." I felt my legs weaken. I had to lean against the public phone counter. Mr. Henderson looked at me, concerned, but made a gesture that he would step away to give me privacy. "There's more," Samuel continued. "She's not alone there. A man meets her at the hotel, tall, salt and pepper hair, looks about 60 years old. I found out his name is Julian Thorne. From what I gathered, he's also married. He has a family in Atlanta. He's a retired professor from the State University." Julian. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Lena had attended the university in Atlanta when she was young, before we got married. Sometimes she'd mention a professor who had inspired her greatly, who had been almost a mentor. Could it be the same man? My head began to spin, connecting dots that had previously seemed disconnected. Have they been meeting for a long time? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. From what I discovered, talking to hotel staff. They are repeat customers. They've been meeting regularly for at least 3 years. 3 years. The exact time Lena started with the story of the sick grandmother. 3 years of lies, of betrayal, of me being played for a fool in my own home. The pain I felt was so physical that I needed to sit down on a park bench after hanging up the phone. Samuel promised to send me a complete report with pictures and more details. I returned home, shattered, but something inside me began to change. The pain was giving way to a cold, calculated rage. I wasn't going to just confront Lena and let her invent more lies. No, I was going to plan something she would never forget. When Lena returned Sunday night, I already had my plan formulated in my head. I greeted her just as I always did, asking about her grandma with the same feigned interest as every other time. She told me they had gone to the doctor again, that the old lady's blood pressure remained unstable. I even brought you some caramel chews that Grandma made especially for you, Curtis. What a treat, I said, sampling the candy that she had probably bought at the Atlanta terminal. When are you going to take me to meet this talented grandmother? Lena let out that nervous chuckle that I now recognized as a sign of lying. Oh, you know how she is, my old man. She doesn't like strangers. She gets agitated. That night, while she slept beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the wood-paneled ceiling of our house, feeling the humid heat that is characteristic of Clifton Creek, even at night. 35 years together. A whole life shared. 2 children raised, and now this. The betrayal hurt like a thorn from a rose. But what hurt the most was the elaborate nature of the lie. She hadn't just given in to an impulse. She had built a whole story, sustained over years. In the following days, I received Samuel's report in the mail, inside a bank envelope to avoid suspicion. There were photos of Lena entering the hotel, of Julian receiving her in the lobby, the 2 of them having dinner at a restaurant in the city. In one of the shots, he was kissing her on the forehead with an intimacy that turned my stomach. Sitting on the porch of the house, sipping my sweet tea from the glass jar I got as a gift from my friend Tony, I looked at those pictures and felt a knot in my chest. Samuel had done a complete job. He discovered that Julian was married to Eliza for 40 years. He had 3 children and 5 grandchildren. He was a respected man in Atlanta, teaching Mexican literature until he retired. Lena had been his student in her first year of college, which she dropped out of when we got married. Apparently, the admiration for the professor had never completely died. In the meantime, I kept pretending everything was normal. I went fishing with the fellas at the lake on Saturdays when the heat let up. I attended the Retired Merchants Association meetings on Wednesdays. I watched the local college football games at Tommy's Roadhouse, sipping a whiskey and water that only he knew how to mix. Inside, however, I boiled with indignation every time I looked at Lena and remembered the photos, the betrayal, the elaborate lie. Even at the traditional town celebrations, I couldn't enjoy myself like before. At the last bazaar for Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, the patron saint of our region, I was there, fulfilling my social role, eating tamales and chili, but with my head racing a mile a minute. In conversations with the other men, when the topic was wives, I stayed quiet, swallowing hard, thinking about my own situation. It was during one of those fishing trips that the idea for my revenge began to take shape. It was me, Tony, Biggs, and Mr. Gerald, sitting on the edge of the reservoir, our bamboo rods stuck in the bank, waiting for a bite. The conversation, as always, drifted between fishing stories, local politics, and family anecdotes. That's when my buddy Tony talked about the surprise party he'd organized for his wife's 50th birthday. I called the whole family, all their friends, even folks she hadn't seen in years. It was such a bash. People are still talking about it. Teresa nearly fainted when she saw everyone gathered yelling, "Surprise!" he recounted proudly. A party, a big party, where I could expose everything. Lena's 60th birthday was coming up. It was in 3 months. Now, plenty of time to plan every detail. She always wanted a big party. She always mentioned how Sister Siobhan had a beautiful celebration for her 60th with a decorated hall and everything. "I'm going to throw a surprise party for Lena," I casually commented during dinner a few days later. We were eating some catfish I'd caught at the lake, prepared with lemon sauce and herbs from our backyard. "I think she deserves a nice celebration for 60 years. It's not every day you reach that age." Her eyes sparkled with emotion. "Really? You don't need to do anything too elaborate, Curtis." "Leave it to me, will ya?" I replied, with a smile she couldn't possibly interpret. "I want it to be special. Unforgettable, even." And so, I began preparations for the biggest trap Clifton Creek had ever seen. First, I hired the Commercial Association Hall, the largest venue in town, where the fair dances and big town events happen. Then I started organizing the guest list, our children and grandchildren, of course, who lived in Atlanta, Lena's relatives who lived in other cities, our friends and acquaintances here, her former colleagues from the time she taught at the municipal school. But the highlight of my list were 2 names, Julian Thorne and Eliza Thorne. Yes, I was going to invite the lover and his wife to the party. I got their address from Samuel and sent a formal, handwritten invitation as if it were from Lena herself. "My husband is organizing this surprise, but I would really love for you, who were so important in my academic foundation, to be present." To guarantee they would come, I called their home personally, introducing myself as an assistant for the surprise party. I spoke with Eliza, saying Lena would be thrilled to see her old professor and his wife again, after so many years. The poor woman, suspecting nothing, thanked me for the invitation and promised they would be there. The rest of the plan required contacts in Atlanta. Samuel helped me get more photos of their meetings, hotel records, and even some letters they exchanged when they couldn't meet. I mounted everything on a board and prepared a presentation that would be shown on the hall's giant screen, the kind people use to show pictures of the birthday person. I also got a copy of the death certificate for Lena's real grandmother, a document that would be the climax of my revelation. Everything was prepared with the same care I used when assembling the shelves in my building supply store. Every piece in its place, every detail considered so that nothing would go wrong. As the date approached, Lena grew more and more curious about the famous surprise I was preparing. She'd say I was being mysterious, disappearing sometimes without explaining clearly where I was going. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Now she was the one who was suspicious of me. "It's just a little party," I deflected while we had our morning coffee on the porch with those warm corn tamales she made so well. "Don't try to guess, or you'll ruin the surprise." Inside, I was counting the days. The revenge would be served not on a cold platter, but in a crowded hall with 200 witnesses. Every time she left to visit her grandmother, my determination only increased. The plan was set, and it would be unforgettable, not just for Lena, but for the whole town of Clifton Creek. The day of the party arrived. It was a clear Saturday morning, the kind only the heart of Alabama can provide. An infinite blue, without a cloud, with the strong sun shining as if blessing what was to come. I woke up early, even before the neighbor's rooster crowed, my heart racing. Lena was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of what awaited her. I slipped out quietly and spent the whole day at the association hall, supervising the final preparations. The place was looking nice, I have to admit. Colorful streamers, balloons, a long table for the cake and desserts. On the stage, I set up the screen and tested the projector 3 times to be sure everything would work at the right moment. The sound technician, Biggs's son, had also arrived and was setting up the equipment. "Do you want some background music before starting? Or are you going straight to the show, Mr. Sterling?" he asked, adjusting the cables. "First, low background music. Then when I give the signal, you cut the sound and turn on the projector. Got that?" "Yes, sir. You can count on me." My friend Tony arrived shortly after to help me with the tables and chairs. He didn't know my true plan. He thought it was just a regular surprise party. While we were arranging the hall, he noticed my restlessness. "You're nervous, buddy. It's normal. Surprises always get us like this." I forced a smile. "That's right. I just want everything to go well." Around 3 in the afternoon, the caterers hired from the Soul Food Kitchen began arriving with the food. The smell of barbecue, fried chicken, rice and beans, and collard greens took over the atmosphere. On the dessert table, pecan sandies, lemon squares, and the 3-layer cake with buttercream frosting and strawberries, Lena's favorite. Everything perfect, everything impeccable, worthy of a grand celebration or a grand revelation. I returned home around 5, finding Lena anxious. Our oldest daughter, Denise, who lived in Atlanta, had arrived as a surprise, in agreement with me, of course, and had taken her mother to get ready at the only beauty parlor in town. "Curtis, where have you been all day? Look, Denise just showed up and said you asked her to take me to get my hair cut. My nails done. What is going on?" I shrugged, trying to appear as natural as possible. "It's your 60th birthday. We have to celebrate in style, right? Now go get ready. We have an engagement later." "What engagement? Where?" "If I tell you, it stops being a surprise. Put on that blue dress I gave you for Christmas. It looks pretty on you." While she got ready, I was a wreck. I called to confirm the last details. The guests would start arriving at 7. The van I had sent from Atlanta had already left to pick up the Thorne couple and would arrive around at 8, all according to plan. At 7:30, we left the house. Lena looked beautiful in the blue dress, hair styled, meticulous makeup. She even looked younger. Ironic coincidence. On the way to the hall, she tried several more times to find out what I was planning. "We're going to dinner at that new restaurant that opened on the edge of town, right?" she ventured. "Better than that," I replied dryly, my eyes fixed on the road. When we pulled into the association parking lot, she frowned, seeing so many cars. "Is there some event here today?" "You'll find out soon enough." I took her hand and guided her to the hall entrance. The agreement with the guests was that they would stay silent when they saw us enter. I opened the door slowly and gently pushed her inside. For an instant, the hall remained in absolute silence. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward us. Then, like an explosion, everyone yelled in unison, "Surprise!" The look on Lena's face was priceless. First shock, then understanding, then pure joy. Tears began to form in the corners of her eyes as she looked around, seeing relatives she hadn't seen in years, longtime friends, town acquaintances. The hall was packed, exactly as I had planned. "Curtis, you did all this for me?" she asked, emotional, squeezing my hand. "You haven't seen anything yet," I replied, forcing a smile. "The night is just beginning." For the first hour, everything went like a normal party. Lena moved among the guests, accepting hugs and congratulations, laughing at jokes, posing for photos. The background music played old hits, the kind that were part of our youth. Drinks were served. The barbecue was praised by everyone. I kept one eye on the door, waiting. When I finally saw the Thorns enter, I felt a chill in my stomach. Julian was exactly as in the photos. Tall, salt and pepper hair, well-tailored, with the elegant bearing of someone who spent his life among books and students. Beside him, Eliza, a gentle-looking woman wearing a discreet floral dress and a pearl necklace. They looked a little lost, looking around, probably searching for Lena. I walked over to them before they could find her. "Good evening, Professor Thorn." "Mrs. Thorn," I greeted them with all the cordiality I could muster. "I'm Curtis, Lena's husband. So glad you could make it." "The pleasure is ours," he replied, extending his hand. Lena was one of my brightest students, even though she was only at the university for a short time. I always wondered what would have happened if she'd continued her studies. I had to restrain the urge to punch him right there. "Well, yes, life takes unexpected turns," I commented, swallowing hard. "Please, make yourselves comfortable. Lena is over there greeting guests. Soon we'll have a special moment, a surprise presentation." I left them and headed straight for the restroom, needing a moment alone. I looked at myself in the mirror, seeing the face of a 73-year-old man, marked not only by time, but by disappointment. I took several deep breaths, mentally rehearsing what I would say. I returned to the hall, more determined than ever. Lena was on the other side, chatting animatedly with some church friends. She hadn't yet seen the Thorns, who were now seated at a table off to the side. It was time. I walked onto the stage and signaled Big Sun to cut the music. I took the microphone, and when silence fell over the hall, I began to speak. "Good evening, everyone. First, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight for this very special occasion. Lena, my wife for 35 years, is celebrating her 60th birthday today." Applause echoed through the hall. Lena, in the center of the floor, smiled emotionally. "In these 35 years together, we've lived a lot. We raised a family, raised our children, worked hard in the building supply store that many of you know. Brick by brick, as I always like to say, we built our story." I pause, feeling my throat dry. But today, we are not just here to celebrate Lena's birthday. We are here to celebrate the truth. Her smile faltered for an instant. A confused murmur ran through the hall. For the past 3 years, Lena has been visiting her grandmother every Friday, an elderly lady who, according to her, needs special care. A grandmother who lives in Atlanta, 200 miles from here. Lena visibly paled. I saw her eyes frantically searching the room, as if looking for an escape. A few months ago, while visiting the cemetery on Memorial Day, I discovered something interesting. I signaled the sound man. On the screen behind me appeared the photo of the headstone I had taken with a borrowed camera. Maeve Sterling, Lena's grandmother, passed away in 2014. The silence in the hall was so deep you could hear a mosquito buzz. All eyes now alternated between the screen and Lena, who looked frozen in the center of the dance floor. Curious, isn't it? How someone can visit a person who has been gone for 10 years. A murmur began to grow among the guests. I saw our children looking at their mother with expressions of confusion. I hired a private investigator. I discovered that Lena does not go to visit any grandmother in Atlanta. She goes to meet a man. More photos began to appear on the screen. Lena entering the hotel, Lena and Julian having dinner, walking together down the street. A man named Julian Thorn, a retired professor from the University of Atlanta, a professor who, by coincidence, is here today, invited by me to this party. All heads turned, searching. Julian was standing now, his face ashen. Beside him, Eliza was looking at her husband with an expression of horror and disbelief. Professor, please, Gahamamapahur. The party is for both of you, too. The entire hall was in shock. Julian, pale as a ghost, seemed incapable of moving. His wife, in contrast, stood up abruptly, knocking her chair backward. What does this mean, Julian? What is this man saying? Her voice echoed through the hall. Lena finally managed to move. She took 2 steps in my direction, her face contorted in a mix of rage and desperation. Curtis, for God's sake, what are you doing? I'm just telling the truth, Lena. Something you failed to do for the last 3 years. The images continued to scroll on the screen. Hotel records showing the check-in dates, which matched exactly with the supposed visits to the grandmother. The death certificate of Maeve Sterling. More photos of the couple. For 3 years, my wife lied to me, inventing a grandmother who no longer existed so she could meet up with her old professor, a man who, just like me, is also married. Eliza was now weeping openly, being comforted by some ladies who didn't even know her. Julian remained motionless, like a pillar of salt. Our children had rushed to Lena, who was crying uncontrollably. Denise held her, while Marcus looked at me with an expression of disbelief. Dad, did it have to be like this, in front of everybody? I ignored the question and continued in a firm voice, despite the internal turmoil. Today, we are not just celebrating 60 years of life, but also 35 years of marriage and 3 years of betrayal. An elaborate, meticulous betrayal, complete with fictional characters and invented stories. I extended my arm toward Lena, who was now sobbing in her daughter's arms. Happy birthday, Lena. I hope you enjoyed the surprise. Chaos took over the hall. People whispered. Some began to quietly slip away. Julian finally managed to move, heading toward his wife, who repelled him with a slap to the face that resonated through the room. I stepped off the stage, feeling my legs tremble, but my head held high. I walked past Lena without looking her in the eye. My son grabbed my arm. Dad, are you all right? I am. Now, I replied, in an almost whisper. Now, I finally am? The party was over before it even really began. The birthday cake remained untouched on the table. The colorful balloons now seemed to mock the celebration that had turned into a funeral. The funeral of my marriage, my illusions, my trust. I went out onto the hall's porch, needing air. Out there, the night was studded with stars, and that big, bright moon you only see in the country. I took a deep breath of the air, fragrant with local blossoms. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my friend, Tony. Buddy, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, I replied, looking toward the horizon. Sometimes silence says everything that needs to be said. We stood there side by side, while behind us, the sound of what should have been a celebration turned into murmurs of scandal and consternation. The revenge had been served, but its taste wasn't as sweet as I imagined. It was bitter, like the pulp of a prickly pear, when you bite into it carelessly. But it was done, and Clifton Creek would have something to talk about for the next 10 years. The days that followed the party were like a nightmare in slow motion. I returned home alone that night, leaving Lena in the care of our children. The empty house felt haunted by ghosts of the past, every corner holding a memory that was now stained by the betrayal. I sat on the porch swing, the one I had made myself with hickory wood years ago, and stayed there until dawn, watching the stars disappear into the Clifton Creek sky. The news spread through town like fire in dry straw. In small places like ours, secrets don't last long. And the story of the birthday party that became a revelation of betrayal spread from mouth to mouth. The next day, when I went to the market to buy bread and coffee,
I felt all eyes on me. Some looked away when they saw me, others greeted me with a discreet nod and a whispered, "Good morning." Few had the courage to speak directly to me, and those were the ones who surprised me the most. Mrs. Johnson, the owner of the pharmacy, an elderly lady in her 70s who knew everyone in town, was one of the first to approach me directly. "Mr. Sterling," she said, stopping me on the blind walk in front of the pharmacy. "I heard what happened. I want you to know I'm on your side. What Lena did, you just don't do that. And I've known her since she was a girl." "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. It's just life." "Yes, it is. You never imagine you'll go through things like this when you get married, do you? My late husband, God rest his soul, pulled one over on me a long time ago too, but those were different times. I kept quiet. I swallowed it. You did right to expose everything." I heard several similar stories in the days that followed. It seemed my story had opened a floodgate, and now many other stories of betrayal and disappointment were coming to light, as if people needed to tell me their own pain so I wouldn't feel so alone in mine. Lena never came back home. I found out from our children that she was staying at Sister Siobhan's house on the other side of town. Denise came to visit every day, bringing food she cooked herself, worried that I wasn't eating right. Marcus showed up more often at night after work and sat with me on the porch to have a sweet tea and talk about trivial things, avoiding the subject of his mother. It was on one of those nights, almost 2 weeks after the party, that Marcus finally broached the subject that hung over us like a thundercloud. "Dad, Mom wants to talk to you." I took a long sip of the sweet tea before answering. "What for?" "She wants to explain things, apologize. She's devastated." "There's nothing to explain, son. Everything was already said that night." Marcus sighed, running his hand through his hair, the same way I do when I'm nervous. "Don't you think you could at least listen to what she has to say? Not for her, but for us, your children." I looked at my son, seeing in him the reflection of my younger self, full of hope and belief in the goodness of people. He and his sister were suffering, caught between the love for their father and their mother, not knowing which side to take. It wasn't fair to them. "All right, tell her to come by tomorrow afternoon. I'll be here." The next afternoon I was nervous, more than I had been in a long time. I tidied the house, swept the porch, put fresh tea in the ceramic pitcher. I wanted everything to be in order, not for Lena, but out of personal pride. I didn't want her to think I had fallen apart without her. Lena arrived promptly at 3 o'clock. She was thinner, her face marked by deep shadows under her eyes, red from too much crying. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a sloppy bun. She seemed to have aged years in just 2 weeks. "Come in," I said dryly, opening the door. She hesitated for a moment, as if she were entering foreign territory, and not the house where she had lived for decades. She sat on the living room sofa, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I offered coffee, more out of habit than hospitality. "No, thank you," she declined. "Curtis, I don't even know where to start." "The beginning would be good," I replied, sitting in the armchair across from her. "How did all this start?" Lena took a deep breath, like someone gathering courage to dive into turbulent water. "Do you remember that time we went to Atlanta for my cousin's son's wedding 3 years ago?" I nodded. I vaguely remembered the trip, a normal weekend with nothing special about it. I ran into Julian by chance at a bookstore. He was signing a book, a collection of poetry. I went to ask for an autograph more out of courtesy than interest. He recognized me immediately, even after all those years. Lena paused, her eyes fixed on the floor. We had coffee. We talked about old times. He asked why I had dropped out of college. I told him I had gotten married, come to live here.
We talked for hours, Curtis. Hours. The kind of conversation I hadn't had with anyone in a very long time. A pang went through my chest. It was true that over the years, our conversations had become increasingly superficial, more about the everyday and less about dreams, ideas, feelings. We exchanged numbers, she continued. We started talking through emails. He'd send me his poems. I wrote about life here. It was just a friendship at first, I swear. And when did it stop being just a friendship? I asked, my voice harsher than I intended. A few months later, he invited me to attend a lecture he was giving at the university. He said it would be good for me to see what the academic environment I had left behind was like. I invented a visit to a friend in Atlanta and went. Lena then told me, through tears, how what started as intellectual curiosity had turned into an attraction and then an affair. How Julian made her feel smart, interesting, valued. How conversations about literature, philosophy, and art filled a void she didn't even know existed. And the grandmother story. Where did all that lying come from? It was his idea, she admitted, looking even smaller in the chair. He suggested it would be easier to justify regular trips if it were to visit a sick relative. I remembered that my grandmother had passed away, but that nobody here knew her well. It was wrong. I know, it was cowardly. It was cruel, Lena, I corrected. Lying to me for 3 years, inventing stories about medication, high blood pressure, bringing gifts she supposedly made. That went beyond cowardly. That was cruel and calculating. She cried even harder, her body shaking with sobs. Part of me wanted to hug her, comfort her, as I had done so many times throughout our 35 years together. But another part, the one still bleeding from the betrayal, kept me firm where I was. Curtis, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything we built, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. I laughed without humor. Love? Is that what you call love? Cheating on me, lying to me, making me look like a fool in front of the whole town? It wasn't about you, she tried to explain. Her voice choked. It was about me. About a part of me that had been asleep for years, that woke up when I reconnected with Julian. I know it sounds selfish. It sounds and is selfish, Lena. Completely selfish. We were silent for a few minutes. The only sound in the room was the old wall clock ticking, marking time that now seemed stagnant. And now? She finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. What happens to us now? I looked at her, the woman with whom I had shared more than half my life. I thought of everything we went through together, the birth of our children, the financial struggles at the beginning, the building of the store brick by brick, the joys, the sorrows. There is no us anymore, Lena. That ended that night in the association hall. You can't forgive me, not even for everything we lived through. Maybe someday, I replied honestly. But not now. I can't even look at you without seeing the pictures, without imagining the two of you together, without remembering all the lies. She nodded slowly, seeming to accept the harsh reality before her. And the house? The things? The house is yours too. You can come get whatever you want. I'm thinking of selling everything. Frankly, staying here holds too many memories now. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Maybe to Atlanta, to be closer to the grandkids, or maybe far away from here. I need to think. Lena stood up, looking aged and defeated. I'm so sorry, Curtis, for everything. I never meant to hurt you like this. But you did, I replied simply. And some wounds don't heal, Lena. They just bleed less over time. I walked her to the door. Before leaving, she turned to me one last time, her eyes pleading for something I could no longer give. Goodbye, Lena. Goodbye, Curtis. And so she left, taking with her 35 years of shared history and leaving behind a man who would need to find a new reason to keep going. In the months that followed, life in Clifton Creek was never the same. I discovered that Julian and Eliza also separated. I heard he left Atlanta, too ashamed to continue in the city where he was respected as an intellectual and professor. Lena ended up moving to Atlanta to be close to our daughter. She started working in a bookstore, ironically enough. As for me, I decided I needed a radical change. I put the house up for sale, along with what remained of the building supplies store. I didn't need the money. My retirement and a lifetime of savings were enough. I needed freedom, the feeling of a new beginning. I bought a used pickup truck, still in good shape, and started traveling across the country. First, I went to the coast of North Carolina, to the Outer Banks, where I'd never been. I spent a month in Nag's Head, marveling at the ocean that I only knew from pictures. Then I continued on to Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia, seeing the historic cities I'd always wanted to visit. In each place, I told my story to anyone who would listen. At first, it was painful, like poking an open wound. Over time, I realized that talking about what happened was a form of healing. People reacted in different ways. Some laughed at my epic revenge. Others comforted me. Some even criticized the way I exposed everything. I listened to everyone, thanked them for the advice, but kept moving. The pain never completely disappeared, but I learned to live with it, like a broken branch that, even when healed, never grows in the same way again. I stayed in touch with my children. I visited the grandchildren in Atlanta occasionally. Lena and I saw each other a few times on those visits. We exchanged polite words, asking about each other's health, like two strangers who once knew each other well. Of all the cities and places I visited, I never returned to Clifton Creek, not out of spite or anger, but because that chapter of my life had closed. As we say back home, a bull that goes to the muddy pit once won't go back to wallow again. But even from a distance, I knew my story had become a kind of legend in the little Alabama town. Curtis's revenge was recounted in sweet tea circles, at roadhouse tables and family gatherings. Some details were exaggerated, others invented, as happens with every good story that passes by word of mouth. They say that now when some wife in Clifton Creek invents an excuse to leave the house, the suspicious husband asks, half jokingly, half seriously, "Are you going to visit the grandmother who already passed away?" Today, I'm 73 years old, looking back and reflecting on everything I have lived. It's been almost 10 years since that night in the Clifton Creek Commercial Association Hall. 10 years of highways, of discoveries, of loneliness sometimes, but also of a freedom I never imagined I'd have in old age. I'm sitting on the porch of a small inn in Asheville, North Carolina, another small town, but so different from my home state. Here, the blue of the sky contrasts with the green of the preserved mountains, a place of new beginnings, of renewal. I came to spend a season. Maybe I'll stay longer. Maybe I'll move on tomorrow. That's the beauty of my life now. I have no roots, no commitments, just the road ahead. I got a call from Marcus yesterday. My son, now a grown man in his 50s, gave me news that affected me more than I expected. Lena is sick. Cancer, the kind that doctors only discover at an advanced stage when there's little to do but provide comfort. She asked about you, Dad. Marcus said, his voice choking up on the other end of the line. "I think she'd like to see you one last time." I remained silent for a long time, watching a bright red cardinal land on a nearby tree. How strange life is in its twists and turns. 10 years ago, I swore I would never exchange more than polite words with Lena again. Now, the prospect of her imminent passing woke up feelings in me that I thought were long dead. "Dad, are you still there?" "Yes, son. I'm thinking." I know it's asking a lot. I know what she did isn't... "It's not that, Marcus," I interrupted. "That anger left years ago. It's just that I don't know if I can see her like that. The last image I have of her is of a strong, headstrong woman." "She's still headstrong," Marcus chuckled lightly. "She told the doctors she's not going to die before sorting things out with you." It was my turn to laugh. Typical Lena. Always determined, always believing she could bend the world to her will. "I'll think about it, son. I promise." I gave myself a few days. We hung up, and I stayed there, sitting on the porch, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains. The tropical night fell quickly, as it always does in this region. The stars appeared, thousands of them, without the light pollution of the big cities to obscure them. I thought of everything I had learned in these years on the road. I learned that life is too short to carry grudges, that forgiveness is a journey and not a destination, and that nobody is entirely a villain or a hero in real-life stories. We are all complex, contradictory, capable of the best and the worst. I remembered a conversation I had with an old fisherman in Biloxi, Mississippi some years ago, sitting on the edge of the Gulf, watching the pelicans sun themselves on the muddy piers. We talked about forgiveness. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "holding a grudge is like holding a hot coal in your hand, waiting for the right moment to throw it at someone. In the end, you're the one who gets burned." The next morning, I packed my few belongings into the pickup truck and headed toward Atlanta. The drive from Asheville takes several hours, enough time to contemplate the landscapes passing by the window and organize my thoughts. The Carolina mountains at this time of year are a unique spectacle. Colorful wildflowers bloom amidst the lush vegetation, defying the apparent dryness. I arrived at Denise's house at the beginning of the night. My daughter greeted me with a tight hug and teary eyes. "Thank you for coming, Dad. It means a lot." "Where is she?" I asked directly. "At the General Hospital. Marcus is with her now. We can go early tomorrow, if you prefer to rest from the trip." I shook my head. I want to go now. The hospital was quiet at that hour, only the muffled sound of medical equipment and the occasional hurried steps of nurses in the hallway. Lena's room was the last one down the corridor. A wide window allowed a view of the city lights in the distance. Marcus stood up when we entered, hugging me briefly before whispering, "She fell asleep a little while ago. The pain medication makes her drowsy." I approached the bed slowly, almost fearfully. The woman lying there looked like a fragile, diminished version of the Lena I knew. Her hair, now completely white, had been cut very short. Her cheekbones stood out on her thin face. Her hands, resting on the white sheet, were marked by bruises from my HIV needles and medication. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her. Denise and Marcus, sensing I needed privacy, murmured something about going to the cafeteria and slipped out silently. I stayed there alone, watching the soft rise and fall of Lena's chest with each breath. So many memories, so many years. The first meeting at the church picnic, the courtship hidden from her parents, the simple but hopeful marriage, the birth of our children, the building of the store brick by brick. And yes, also the betrayal, the lie, the public exposure, the separation. It was all part of our story, the sweet and the bitter, intertwined inseparably. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in memories. At some point, I felt a slight movement. Lena had opened her eyes and was looking at me with a mix of surprise and emotion. "Curtis?" Her voice was barely a rough whisper. "You came?" "I came," I replied simply. She tried to adjust herself in bed, wincing in pain with the effort. Instinctively, I reached out to help her, adjusting the pillows so she was more comfortable. "Thank you," she murmured, "for coming and for helping me now." I nodded, not knowing exactly what to say. 10 years of distance. And now, here we were, an old couple who had shared a life and then gone separate ways, reunited again by the inevitability of death. "You're different," she observed, "but at peace." "The road changes a person," I replied. "Seeing new places, meeting different people, makes you think about what really matters." "And what really matters, Curtis?" I reflected for a moment. The love we give, the memories we create, the impact we have on the lives of others. In the end, that's all that's left. She smiled faintly, her eyes shining with contained tears. "You always had that way with words." "I'm so sorry, Curtis, for everything. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. I regret what I did to us." "I know," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my voice. "And I forgave you a long time ago, Lena. I just didn't know how to say it." A solitary tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing to move forward without the weight of resentment. I carried that anger for too long. It hurt me, not you." We fell silent for some time, only the sound of the medical equipment filling the room. Outside, the Atlanta night glowed with thousands of lights, vaguely recalling the starry sky of Clifton Creek that we contemplated together so many times on the porch swing. "Do you know what I regret the most?" she asked suddenly. "What?" "Not having told you the truth from the beginning. Not having talked about how lost, how incomplete I felt. We could have talked, maybe found a way together." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe not. We'll never know." "Were you happy in these years, Curtis, after everything?" I thought of the roads traveled, the mountains I climbed, the rivers where I fished, the people I met, the feeling of freedom, of having no roots, of being able to follow the wind like the thistle seeds that float across the fields. I was, in a different way, but I was. "And you?" She smiled sadly. "I had moments, the grandchildren growing up, a job I discovered I love. But something was always missing. You were always missing." I didn't know how to respond to that. Part of me wanted to say that I missed her too, that despite everything that happened, she was, and always will be, an essential part of my story. Another part hesitated to reveal such vulnerability. Could you hold my hand for a minute?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I reached out and took hers, much frailer and colder than I remembered. We stayed like that for a long time, without words, just the contact reconnecting two old people who once shared dreams, plans, a life. When Denise and Marcus returned, they found us like that, holding hands, talking softly about the grandchildren, about the small joys of life, as if the 10 years of separation had been just a brief interval in a continuous conversation. Lena passed away 3 weeks later. I was by her side until the end, taking turns with the children in the daily care, reading to her when her eyes got too tired, helping her eat when her strength diminished, simply being present when words were no longer necessary. At the funeral, held in Atlanta as per her wishes, there were only the closest family members and a few friends. I made sure to bring a bouquet of marigolds, the same ones that adorned our yard in Clifton Creek. A small gesture to symbolize that despite everything, our story began and will always belong to that piece of Alabama soil. After everything was over, I went back to my pickup truck, uncertain about where to go now. The map open on the passenger seat showed dozens of places marked in pencil, cities, towns, national parks I still wanted to see. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a different pull, an old call I thought I had silenced. I started the engine and, without thinking too much, drove onto the highway in the direction of Clifton Creek. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for there, but I felt I needed to close this cycle somehow. The little town was different and the same all at once. Some new constructions, others so familiar that it seemed I had never left. I drove slowly past the town square, past Tommy's Roadhouse, now managed by his son, past the main church where I got married, past the corner where my building supply store used to be, now turned into a clothing boutique. I kept going until I reached the memorial park on top of the hill that overlooks the town. There, besides my father's grave, there was now a new headstone with Lena's name on it. Our children had decided that even though she passed away in Atlanta, she should rest in her hometown alongside her ancestors. It was there, before that cold stone with her name, that I finally understood. There is no revenge that can heal a broken heart. There is no public exposure that can undo the pain of betrayal. There is no escape that can distance us from our own feelings. True forgiveness, true healing, comes from accepting that we are all imperfect, all capable of hurting and being hurt, all deserving of a second chance, even if that chance arrives in unexpected ways and at moments that feel too late. I left a small bouquet of wildflowers on the grave and whispered a final goodbye. Not to the Lena who betrayed me, nor to the repentant Lena who tried to fix things, but to the Lena with whom I shared most of my life, the mother of my children, the woman who, despite everything, was my first and most enduring love. I returned to the pickup truck. I looked one last time at Clifton Creek silhouetted against the orange sunset sky and drove away. There were more roads to travel, more stories to live and tell, more lessons to learn. Life, even in old age, continues to surprise us with its unexpected turns. Today, I share this story as a reminder that the deepest wounds can heal, that forgiveness is a journey and not a destination, and that in the end, it is the bonds we create, even those that were broken and then somehow reconstituted, that give true meaning to our time in this world. If this story touched your heart just a little, leave that like so this old man can be happy. Subscribe right now to the Grandpa's Diaries channel so you don't miss the next stories I'll share with all my heart. And tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is there now. Have you ever forgiven someone who hurt you deeply? This old man is very happy to know which little corner of the world you're in and at what time of day you took a moment to listen to my story. A big, tight hug the size of my heart.